grade math this year. Some of you know me, some of you don't. What we're going to do today is go into Module 6, Lesson 1. If we were to be back in school, this is exactly where we would go on. So this is just a continuation of our learning. Allow me to be the voice of all your teachers when I say that we miss you very much. We wish that we could be in the classroom with you, talking to you, hearing about your day, what's going on. What you're going to need for the lesson today, I know that some of you have your green workbook with you. You're going to need your green workbook if you can. We're going to be working directly in the problem set. We're going to be working on the specific number lines that are in there. So it would be a good help if you have that. If you don't, no worries. You can grab a notebook. It can be your math notebook. It can be any notebook that you have that has free sheets of paper or loose leaf piece of paper if you have it. And a pencil, of course. What I will ask of you is that you press pause on this video now so that you can get your materials because we're just going to go straight through. Okay? Our objective for today, for this lesson, is to construct a coordinate system on a line. Okay? Before we go into it a little bit deeper, I'm going to give you some vocabulary terms that you can write down so that we can understand what's going on a little bit better. All right, so our first vocabulary word is coordinate, and that is just a group of numbers that tell the position. Now, I made this definition a little bit vague, a little bit broad, not specific, because as we learn more about the coordinate plane, our definition is going to be a little bit more specific. But for right now, for our first lesson, it's going to be a little bit vague, less specific, broad, all the different synonyms for that word. But an example of a coordinate is like this. Now, some of you may be familiar with the word or the example here because during our TCAP test or our TCAP practice test, we had questions that asked us about this, and a lot of you were confused, and rightfully so. But now we don't have to be confused anymore. We can grow through our confusion. All right. Our next word is line, of a line, and the definition of it is a straight figure that can have no end. That means it continues all the way one way and all the way the other way, forever and ever. Our next word is origin. Now, the origin is the starting point or beginning of a number line. Because we are working with number lines today, our coordinate, our coordinate for our origin is just 0 or 0, 0. It's just the beginning of our number line. Pretty simple, pretty easy. The last word is plot. Plot is the placement of a number on a line or a plane. Now, once again, a number line is what we're going to be working with today. A coordinate plane is going to be something that we go into the next lesson or we kind of define as we go deeper into Module 6. The questions that we have today are going to ask us to plot a letter, a shape, a box, or whatever it may be on a number line. So what is it asking you to do? When it says to plot something, you're just placing it there. You're writing it down. Okay? Our fluency is asking us to find the missing numbers on a number line. Now, if we look at this number line right here, it's pretty simple, pretty easy. We know that it starts at 0, which is our origin. I really hope you said that with me, but I'll say it again. Our 0 right here is our origin, and it goes all the way until 10. Everything else in between is kind of blank, like they have letters, and it has nothing there. So we can assume that the numbers that go to each notch here are going to be the numbers that lead up to 10. Okay, so let's see if I can get this working, hopefully. All right, so if we were to think about this, 0, what comes after 0? 1. After 1 is 2. I'm so sorry. 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a lot harder than it seems, but it's fine. 7, 8, 9, and 10. Now, I like how I did that. So when we did that, we were able to see that some of these letters actually represent the numbers. So B would be number 2, as we came up with. C, because we can just count it. B is 2, so that means this is 3, this is 4, this is 5. Now, once we have it, hopefully when you write this down on your number line, the writing doesn't disappear like it does on my computer because you're writing on a piece of paper. But we can see what number is the same as these letters, okay? That's all they're asking us to do. And plot or figure out the numbers that connect to these shapes, okay? Now I'm going to walk you through this, of course, because as we can look at a number line, there are some parts that are missing that we need to be able to figure out so that we can give them a number, okay? Now, something that I noticed about this number line is that between every whole number, there are 2 little marks, okay? Which can really represent anything, all right? But we know that it's going to represent a fraction because our whole numbers are already marked there for us. Now, once again, we can make a tape diagram to understand what fraction they're going to be, okay? So I'm going to kind of box this out and expand these lines. Now that I know there are 3 parts in between 0 and 1. All right, I'm going to mark that one more time just so that we can see it. Sorry that it disappears. Hopefully for the next one, I'll be able to figure out how to keep it there so that you can fully see it. But I'm going to only focus on 0 and 1 right now. I know that this is going to apply to all of them. All right, I'm making my box. I'm going to extend these lines so I can see how many parts are being broken up into before we get to 1. All right, so I saw that we have 3 boxes. We have 1 box right here, 1 right here, and 1 right here. So that means that it's going to be broken into thirds. Okay, so between 0 and this number, that's going to be our first third. So that's 1/3 right here. Where the star is going to be 2/3. Sorry, and where our 1 is going to be 3/3 because we know that 3/3 is equal to 1. All right, so before we go finish labeling this, we already know that we have to figure out what our star is. All right, and if we look at B, and if you label it correctly, our B should equal 2/3. So in that box, or that line, or however you're drawing it down, where the star is going to equal 2/3. Okay? Now, we can continue to label these as we go on, but it's important to note that this right here is equal, this mark right here, this mark right here is going to represent 1/3, but it's not just going to represent 1/3, it's going to represent 1 and 1/3 because it's past the whole number 1. Okay, so make sure that when you're labeling them, that you're including the whole number that you pass. If we look at where X is, we see that it's only on 3. It's on 3. There's no third to go with it. It's just 3. So that's easy, simple. 3. So right now we already have A and B labeled. We have 3, and we have 2/3. Okay. So if we look at where C is, hopefully by now you should have all of these labeled. If not, go ahead and pause the video and take a moment to label all of your lines. Remember, they're each 1/3. So this is 1/3. The first one is 1/3. Oh no. The first one is 1/3. And the second one is 2/3. And our whole number is 3/3. Okay, and this continues as we go along. Okay, so if we look at where our circle is, because it's on our first notch in between 2 and 3, we know that our circle is going to be 2 and 1/3. All right, and our square, which is D, is at our second notch between 4 and 5. So we know that that's going to be 4 and 2/3. Okay. Now, this is usually the point where I would ask, or Mr. Matthews or Mr. Jones or Miss Beard would ask if you have any questions. Okay? Now, because we're not with you physically, if you do have any questions, write them down. Write them down on your notes, in your book, on your piece of paper, whatever it may be. We're going to go into the next part of the problem set. Okay, so it's asking us to answer the questions that are down here. Okay? But before we actually get to the questions, we should look at our number line. We should really look at our number line. So we're used to number line starting right here and going this way. But this one's a little bit different. Remember if a couple slides ago when I said that your number line can be changed however you need it to be? Well, this is an example of that. All right. So our origin, our starting point is here, and we're going all the way until 6. Okay. So our whole numbers are labeled here. So what we need to figure out are our fractions that are going to be here as well. Okay. So just like last time, I'm going to look at the distance between 0 and 1, and I'm going to connect the lines so it can make a tape diagram, and I'm going to extend these lines so that I can see how many boxes it makes. It makes 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, almost got it before it went away. I'll try that one more time just to make sure. And if you don't need to draw these lines, if you can imagine these lines, that's fantastic. I'm just making sure that everyone can see my thinking. Okay, so I say 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means that the distance between 0 and 1 is going to be broken up into fourths. Okay, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller so that you can see it a little bit better. So that means that this first notch right here is going to be 1/4. This notch right here is going to be 2/4. And 2/4 is also equal to 1/2. Look at that equivalent fraction there. Oh, goodness. And this last one is going to be 3/4. Go ahead and take the time to finish labeling the rest of this number line. Go ahead and pause the video and label your number line. Okay? So let's look at A. It says plot point A at 3/4. Plot point A at 3/4. Does it have a whole number in front of it? It does not. So I'm going to look to where 3/4 would be. Now, normally I would just look at this part because this is where our origin would be. But because this number line is a little bit different, I know that our 0 is right here. I know that this notch right here equals 1/4. This notch right here equals 2/4. And this notch right here is going to be 3/4. So because we're looking for 3/4, I'm going to plot or put an A right here. Okay? And I'll do that one more time. I'll put an A right here because that's what we would do when they're asking us to put something, to plot something. All right, B. It says label a point that lies at 4 1/2 as B. Now, when we look at our whole numbers, we see 4, that's it, and 1/2. This is 4 1/4. This is 4 2/4. This is 4 3/4. Remember that 4 2/4 equals the same thing as 4 1/2. So our point B is going to be right here. Okay, so once again, A is going to be right here, and B is going to be right here. All right, let's look at C. Now this is a little bit differently because it's not asking us the same thing. It says label a point C whose distance from 0 is 5 more than that of A. Whoa, insane. What does that mean? Let's read it again. Label a point C whose distance from 0 is 5 more than that of A. Okay, I'm going to underline 5 more than. And I know, well, sorry. Sorry, I'm going to underline 5 more than. Okay, I know that more than means that I'm going to add. I'm going to add. All right. All right, if we look back at where A would be, and I'm going to look up here again to make sure that I have it, point A is at 3/4. A is going to be right here. If I am going to add 5 more to where A is, that means I'm going to add 5 plus 3/4, which means that we're going to have 5 and 3/4. 5 and 3/4 as our answer. So that means we find 5 and 3/4 on this number line, and we put the letter C. So 5, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, C. That's where C is. C, B is at 4 1/2, so B would be here. And A is at 3/4. Okay, let's look at D. Plot a point D whose distance from 0 is 1 1/4 less than that of B. Okay, let's read that again. Plot a point D whose distance from 0 is 1 1/4 less than that of B. Now this is going to actually ask us to do a little bit of computation, which means we're going to have to subtract because it says less than. All right. If we look back at where B is 4 1/2. Okay. We also know. So let's go ahead and write that down. 4 1/2. Oh no. Hold on. I'll wait till I erase this. 4 1/2. And we're going to be subtracting 1 1/4 from it because it's what it's asking us to do. All right. So 4 1/2 minus 1 1/4. Now we know that when we're subtracting and adding, our denominators need to be the same. Okay? Our denominators are not the same when we're looking at 4 1/2 and 1 1/4. So what we can do is create an equivalent fraction. Now, we know that 1/2 is the same thing as 2/4. Okay, and we can prove that by multiplying both our numerator and our denominator by 2 to see 2/4. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite this as 4 2/4 minus 1 1/4. All right, I'm going to let you find out the answer before I tell you what it is. Okay, so subtracting that, we know that coordinate D is going to be where 3 1/4 is. So you're going to fill in this part as 3 1/4. And we're going to find this on this plane, on this number line, sorry. 3 1/4 is going to be where plot D is. All right, let's look at E. It says the distance of E from 0 is 1 3/4 more than that of D. Plot point E. Whew, they're requiring a lot of work of us. But this one is adding because it says more than. All right, we just plotted point D, which we already said was 3 1/4. And now we're going to add 1 3/4 to get our answer, to get where point E is going to be. So go ahead and add these two together and figure out where point E is going to be. If you added that correctly, you should have point E. Oh, sorry, before that, if you added that correctly, you should have gotten 4 4/4, which is the same thing as 5. 4 4/4 is equal to the whole number 5. So that means point E should be right here. All right, and last but not least, F, what is the coordinate of the point that lies halfway between A and D? Ooh, that one's a little bit difficult. What is the coordinate of the point that lies halfway between A and D? Now, you should have A on where 3/4 is. You should have D where 3 1/4 is. Okay, A should be right here, 3/4. And D should be 3 1/4. So the easiest way that we can figure out the halfway point between A and D is to mark off the marks until we get to the in-between. What that looks like is marking this one and this, mark this and this, one for each side, until you get to one number in the middle. And that number would be 2, which means that this point is going to be marked as F. We can see that. All right, so the coordinate or the number of the point that lies halfway between A and D is 2. Go into our exit ticket, which is a little bit different than what we're used to. We're going to do it in a different way. Now, this is going to be the work that we're going to ask you to turn in. So whether you have it on in your journal, in your workbook, if you happen to have your white book with you, that is even better. But this is what we're going to ask you to, especially for Miss Beard and I's class, we're going to ask you to take a picture of with your name and send it to us. I'm going to kind of walk you through this or give you some starting points so that you can do this correctly. For Mr. Matthews and Mr. Jones's class, make sure that you ask them, you reach out to them. They should give you some, if they haven't already, they should give you some instructions on how to turn in work. Okay, so let's look at this. It says use number line L. Number line is named L to answer the questions. Okay, now before I even go to this questions down here, I'm going to look at my number line. Okay, I see that 2 is over here. And this other number that we have is less than 2, right? So 2 is not our origin because there's a number less than 2. So that means our origin is going to be 0. So I'm going to put our 0 right here. All right. Now it also kind of gives you a huge, what's the word? Huge hint on our fraction, the fraction that is going to be split up into. Our fraction is going to be fifths. So it means that this number right here is going to be 1 3/5. And if we go backwards, because this is our origin, what's 1/5 less than 1 3/5? It's 1 2/5. Okay? Pretty simple, pretty easy so far. For letter A, says plot point C so that its distance from the origin is 1. Whoa. Plot point C so that its distance from the origin is 1. This is just asking you where the point 1 would be. Where would 1 be? Okay, so we know that once again, this is 1 3/5. This is 1 2/5. 2/5, sorry. And this right here is 0. So 1 is going to be in between 1 2/5 and 0, but it's up to you to figure out where that would be. And you're going to make sure to label that point C. All right, for letter B, it asks you to plot point E 4/5 closer to the origin than C. And then you're going to figure out what the coordinate is. So it's trying to trick you a little bit with the terminology, but it's asking you, what is 4/5 closer to C than from C? I know it's tricky, and we're going to work through it, and I'm going to make sure that we give you the answers and how to get to the answer. But what I want you to do is try your hardest. And the last one, C. Plot a point at the midpoint, midpoint of C and E, label it H. Now, if we go back to what we did in the problem set, where we had to find the halfway point is the same thing as the midpoint. So once you have C and E labeled, you're going to find the midway, the halfway point, to find H. Okay? Once again, if you are in my class or Ms. Beard's class, you're going to snap a picture of your work for this exit ticket question, or this exit ticket questions, and you're going to send it to us through our phone numbers. Make sure that when you send your picture, you include your name and any other question that you may have. For everyone, what I ask you to do in the comment section is to write down a complete sentence about what you've learned. Okay, it can be a very small thing that you learned, or it can be a very big thing that you learned. But what we're going to ask you to do is to put your name in the comments, of course, and then you're going to write your full and complete sentence about one thing that you learned. Okay? If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your teacher. We are very able to answer your questions, whatever questions you may have. So this is it for Module 6, Lesson 1. Thank you for your attention, and I'll see you from Module 6, Lesson 2.